population. It involves a mosquito, protozoan, and a human. Okay? Evolution only works on a population. So these skulls that you see here don't represent one person that, oh my gosh, this person just evolved. Look at that. No. This person belonged to a bunch of others in a population. And the trick is to find as much of the bones in a population and interpolate that so that you can get what one of the persons in that population. See? Sometimes we get lucky and we find an entire skeleton or almost an entire skeleton. And we celebrate and we name the darn thing after a song that is playing at the time. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Oh, it's Lucy. This is Lucy. Okay. We found an entire skeleton. Boy, doesn't that give us a lot of information. Why didn't this happen a long time ago? Boy, Darwin is turning around in his grave right now. See? So just realize that you're measuring a piece of the population. Okay? And the definition of species, there's a number of different definitions of species. All we're trying to do with species is we're trying to figure out how much genetic change does it take before you can call something a different species. That's all we're doing. And sometimes the lines are blurred. You know, it's not like there's a little sign that goes up, yes, a new species. Okay, we determine it's a new species based on the information that we have. The most usable piece of definition that we use for species is the one given by Ernst Mayr, who basically says that a species, you can, if your genetics is so close together, then you can meiose gametes and you can produce an offspring, and that offspring can also do the same, either with a sibling or back to the parents again. So there's enough genetic similarity so that you can carry on the traits generation after generation. So reproductiveness is the definition that we normally use. Okay. Well, if we find two different bones or skeletons or whatever, and they look similar, we don't know if they were breeding with each other or not, because we know that, and we'll learn in our lecture, that sometimes differences are deceiving. Something can look exactly the same. There's something called convergent evolution that makes things look like each other, especially if they live in the same types of environments. But they can be completely different types of mammals or something. We'll get into that. Birds are notorious for that. Okay? Some birds are hard to tell one species from another. The only way you can tell is that one sings a different song. That's how it's measured. Okay? Of course, if you had the birds long enough, you could see if they mate or not. That's another way you could tell. If a bird was to look at humans, they go, oh my God, look at all these species here today. Look how different we are. Do you look like the person next to you? To a bird, you're a different species. But you can reproductively produce offspring, and they're viable, and they can reproduce with the same population. So we know we're the same species. And we've done, of course, the genetic maps and stuff, and we know there's enough similarity. Which is scary, because we have within less than 2% similarity to a chimpanzee. Now, do you look like a chimpanzee? Well, you have some traits that are resembling chimpanzees, but certainly if someone looked at you and a chimpanzee, they would know it's you, and they would know that's the chimpanzee most of the time, right? Depends what you're wearing, I suppose. So sometimes just a small change will make a difference. Can we breed with a chimpanzee and produce viable offspring that can backbreed again? No. So we know we're different species. Okay? It becomes more difficult when you're trying to compare bonobos to chimpanzees. They're very similar. Can they interbreed? Well, successfully? No, maybe not. Okay? They're different species. Okay? So then comes the other thing that I want to talk about, and that is we straighten everything out by using taxonomy. Okay? We put things in taxonomy that represents our evolutionary differences or similarities. That's how how we express individuality of populations of different species. And we have different levels, and you probably learned this in your first semester, I'm not sure. But you have a domain, and you have a kingdom, and you have a phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Do we share all of these the same as a chimpanzee? Where do we draw the line? Where are we now different than a chimpanzee? Huh? Okay. One answer says no. Okay. Good answer. Anyone else? In other words, chimpanzees and humans are in different orders. That's what we're saying. Okay. Anyone else? What is the order of a chimpanzee? They belong to the primates. What is the order of a human? Primates. So, no, it can't be that. Same order. So you mean we share at least all of this with a chimpanzee in taxonomy? Yes. Actually, if you are a purist and you subscribe to cladistics, okay, the modern way of classifying things, you will also say that we share a family. But the old way of thinking is that humans are not chimpanzees. We're much better. We're different. So, my gosh, we don't want to be put in the same family. But basically, we both belong to the apes. We're in ape. A chimpanzee is an ape. There's a name for an ape family. We share the same family. Okay. However, in many taxonomic schemes, like the older ones, you'll see the family for humans being Hominidae, and the family for the apes, which include the gibbons and the gorillas and all those things, as well as chimpanzees, will be Pangidae. That's the old classification. We're reluctant to put us in the group with apes. So when someone accused Darwin of saying, "Are you saying that humans came from apes?" he was right. Absolutely right. Okay? Isn't that like the media that put their foot in their mouth, right? Drawing all these pictures of Darwin looking like a monkey. Now, no, humans didn't come from chimpanzees, that's true. We did not evolve from chimpanzees. We split, we have a common ancestor, but we split, and we've been evolving side by side relatively recently. See, that's why we look so similar. But we did not come from a chimpanzee, and a chimpanzee did not come from a human. It's easier for us to understand that. Most people say, "Oh no, chimpanzees didn't come from humans. Humans came from chimpanzees." Well, if you look at the fossil record, they both share the same common ancestor, and they both were evolving separately for that period of time. So that doesn't make sense. See? So you're going to learn that today too, by using the skulls and measurements and so forth. Part of your exercise today is to try to figure out and to evaluate what are more primitive structures that may have been shared by earlier ancestors. So we're going to find a skull that's an early skull that shows the primitive traits that eventually got changed somewhat as humans evolved. Okay, how did these traits change? What's a primitive trait versus a more advanced trait? For example, a primitive trait may be a big brow, say, ridge here, and a very, very flat, slanted forehead. That's typical of a more primitive. And of course, the picture in the book is the skull I want you to use, is Diopithecus. And there's a picture in the post lab. Okay, and that's the one that you should be looking for. Really, really primitive ones. In other words, there's a question in your post lab, and that's basically what they're doing. Now, if you look at a human, humans have evolved for a while, okay? Since this time, we don't have these around anymore. They went extinct. Okay? However, the genus Australopithecus was around at the same time as Homo. So they share common ancestors. And so one of the exercises will ask you to be able to read the table to see what overlaps with what and what's separate. See? And so that's an exercise that you need to understand that table. Okay, and then there's question marks there because we don't, well, the book is an outdated lab, so there's some of those question marks are cleaned up by now. But your book still presents some question marks, showing that we don't have everything we know. And you're probably wondering, well, why don't you just fudge a little bit and say it's that? No, we're scientists. If we don't know something, we don't know something, we say we don't know it. We don't pretend we know it. Right? So, do we see a huge brow ridge on this thing? Do we see more of a flat, see, more of a vertical forehead, don't we? Okay. Most of us can wear a hat fairly easily. Chimpanzees would have a problem keeping a hat on. Okay. Even monkeys. That's why you see the little strap around them, making sure the monkey doesn't use his hat. Anyway. So that's a human. And these represent skulls from Australopithecus afarensis, Australopithecus africanus, and a young one. Okay. Now these are not the real skulls. We could never afford them, and there's probably only one of them. So we have replicas, okay, of the skulls. And then this is Australopithecus boisei, and you can see a fairly large crest here for huge muscles. And we have the Homo group, Homo habilis, one of the first genus Homo. Okay. And we have Homo erectus. There's a few other Homos now that are known, and some of the Homo erectus have been changed into that name. But the Homo habilis was the one that's fairly much stayed in Africa. Homo erectus is the one that migrated, and we know today that there probably was two migrations. One migration produced the Neanderthals, which is the old caveman, right? And this is actually was classified as a Homo sapiens. It was Homo sapiens neanderthalensis. And then for some reason they changed it to Homo neanderthalensis. Okay, and there's a big argument about, oh well, you know, the Cro-Magnon, the modern humans, with the second wave of migration into Europe, found the Neanderthals, and they competed for the same resources, and being more aggressive and handling the language a little bit better, the Homo sapiens wiped out the Neanderthals. So then they do studies. They actually found bones and teeth of Neanderthals, and they could extract DNA. And they went ahead and they found segments of Neanderthal where they differ from the Cro-Magnon. And lo and behold, they actually found those segments in populations of Homo sapiens. So Homo sapiens have Neanderthal genes. So some of the eradication of Neanderthal was simply interbreeding. So maybe they were Homo sapiens neanderthalensis, the subspecies, rather than Homo neanderthalensis. See, you follow that? That's just really recent discoveries, okay, with genetics, DNA. You live in a wonderful age, by the way. DNA is giving you a lot of information that we didn't have when I was a student. So, how do we know how old something is? There are several different ways in which common is carbon-14 dating. They do use atomic isotopes that break down over time. They have a half-life. So to make a long story short, they measure ratios of carbon-14 to carbon-12, which is the carbon that is on the chemistry periodic table. And so when you're alive, you have a higher amount of carbon-14 because of the cosmic waves coming from the sun, space, outer space. And so when you die and you get buried, some of that carbon-14 goes to carbon-13, carbon-12, and then when they dig you up later, they can tell what ratio you have, and they know that the half-life is 5,000 some odd years, and so they can figure, well, the ratio is such that you have 2 of those, so you're 10,000 years old. See? Most of the time you're finding them around 5,000. It starts to lose its accuracy as you go to around 100,000 or so. So we use other more accurate isotopes with longer half-lives. And we have potassium argon, and a few other things. There's a whole bunch of physics to it. I totally don't understand the physics behind it. All I know, they're isotopes, and I trust the physics that they know what they're talking about. Okay. Okay, anyway, that's what you're doing today. You will not be doing exercise or the procedure on the dandelions, but I'll explain basically, it's sort of a natural selection thing. How many of you know what a dandelion is? What's a dandelion? I don't know what your name's in. What? Shelley. What's a dandelion? A flower. Okay, so like an orchid? Is that a type of dandelion? No? That's a flower. But it's not a flower. It's a flower, but it's not a flower. But it is a flower. What's a dandelion? Well, we call something a weed when they only grow one year, and then they're replaced with the seeds, and then they grow others, right? Which is a good strategy, because if your environment is going to change, wouldn't it be nice just get rid of the parents, and now you have new genetics, and well, some of them they're going to be changed from the parents, meiosis, there's also ways of, if you've read, there's ways of producing seeds, what they call parthenogenically. In other words, if your parent had a good trait, you're going to carry that too. That's what the dandelions are about. But the bottom line is, a dandelion is that little green plant that has usually low leaves, growing in the lawn, so we tend to call it a weed, because most of us don't want that, okay? But then again, your heart's broken when you can't pick up one of those little flower seed pod puffs and blow, and all little seeds will float. Your book, your textbook has a dandelion-like seed that floats in the air and is dispersed, so they have good dispersal methods. Well, anyway, they grow fairly rapidly. And so the exercise was to try to, and it was noticed that grazing dandelions in grazing fields were different than dandelions in a non-grazed field. Even though it was known that at one time, before grazing was introduced, that they were both the same kind of plant. But now, some of the plants had higher stalks, higher plants, and some of them were very low to the ground, and the flower stalks were almost right on the ground, so that grazers that came along ate the grass and they never touched the flowers. So they adapted to different grazing. And so I guess the experiment is that you mow your lawn, and after a while you notice, gee, I don't have any tall dandelions anymore. They're all so small, I have to weed them out now. I can't mow them out. You know? And so that's behind that experiment. Okay, it would take us to grow dandelions, the two types with different seeds in different flats, and you were to do measurements and all that kind of stuff. Measure the roots versus the stalk and get a ratio. Okay. So that's what it's all about. It demonstrates natural selection. Okay, so you can read a little bit more if you want to talk about it. Other than that, the other experiments should be pretty self-explanatory. 11.2 shows you a chart here, and they have major events that has happened, and they tell you how long ago. BYA means but billion years ago. Okay, from ground zero to this point back is 4.6 billion years from today back there. And they go ahead and then, of course, when things get a little more tighter, we used millions of years ago. And then, of course, when things get really close, where there's a lot of activity of life and evolution, then we see just years ago, about they're in the thousands, and then we have some 225 years ago. Well, the signing of the Declaration of Independence. There's no evolution there, I don't think, technically. And then we have someone stepping on the moon, okay, last century. So you're going to follow the directions there. You're going to get a string. You're going to represent a certain length of string for 4.6 billion years. And you're going to work in loops. And you're going to use little, well, you can devise how you want to do this, but you're going to have to tape. Okay, here's string. So we're scientific, we should all use the same size string. Okay, don't like have to use this and have to use that. Okay, just use this. And you have markers, you have calculator, okay, in case you can't do this in your head. And then you have the tape, and you can cut this as small as you want. You can use bigger tape, or draw lines on the tape, and then write as small as you want. These are fine point. It gets really smashed when you get towards the recent ones. And each group is going to make a string representing what you see in that table. So we're learning how to read a table and express it in another form, a graph, okay, a linear graph. And so once you get your string done, put it alongside other strings, make sure they all start at the same point, and I would suggest that you don't stretch them to make them fit. You just lay them so they're not stretched, and then take them on both ends. As long as you don't make any curves, of course. But that's another way you can mess up your experiment. Okay? So let's see, why don't we just figure on each row here, working together to do a string. So we don't have too many strings here. We have 4 to compare. I don't mind if you take. Well, why don't we have the people standing do the 5th string? Okay, we work together to the 5th. So every row will do a string, and we'll see what the results are. Then you have a chart here that shows you the evolution of cells. Prokaryotic cells, eukaryotic cells, the endosymbiotic relationship of the mitochondria and the chloroplast, which you may or may not remember from your first semester. So we can review here if you don't. But anyway, you need to be able to read this graph and answer the questions about the graph. Okay? And so if you've been doing some work at home, maybe you can do some of that. And then the next is the skulls. Now they might have some different members over here. I've arranged them from more or less, the more primitive to the more advanced, okay, or more recent, I should say. Primitive and advanced are really not a good term. More recent and more distant. That's probably a better way of looking at it. So, and then you have the picture of Dryopithecus, which is the ancestral skull. That's the oldest one. Okay, do that. So that's mainly, those require that you measure and take ratios, and you can use, we have tape measures that you can use. You want to make sure you all measure in metrics, okay? And, or, some of this you can probably measure using this, and I still hid those little rulers so they wouldn't get put away. You can use rulers also, okay? Is that it for that? Did I miss anything? And generally speaking, if you can answer the questions in the lab manual, And if you can answer the questions in your post-lab, even though, I don't assign all those questions. You can probably notice I extracted some of the questions and maybe some of them modified a little bit to get certain, answers. But if you know that, you know it well and you know how to apply it, you should do well on the lab tests. Okay? So you can use that as an index. You can date and appearing. So be careful of the words that are being used. Dominating and appearing are two different words. So make sure you go over that chart and can understand what is being expressed. So normally I have that chart on the lab test, and I'll ask you to tell me how many years it's been since this happened, or whatever, or what is the difference, or how long has this been on the earth, or when was it that this happened. So you'll be able to work with the math in doing that. The other thing I would do is also put a little chart there and ask you when things appeared, or what came first, and what was eliminated, those kinds of things. But you'll have charts, you'll have the same kind of charts to work with on your lab test. How far did you get so far on your lab? Anyone finished the lab yet? Okay, so just continue with your lab. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a little practice lab question. I'm going to put some specimen in there and ask you the measurement of the specimen. I'm going to ask you the size of the specimen, okay, and see if you can handle that. Okay? Questions? So it'll be very similar to what you see in the lab.
Yeah, just one day, one night. That's all I ever wanted.
하루만 내게 시간이 있다면 달콤한 네 향기에 취해서 고뇌난 잠들고파 빡빡한 스케줄 사이에 기회가 있다면 따스하고 깊은 눈 안에 몸 담그고파 I like that 너의 그 길고 긴 생머리 올려 묶을 때의 아찔한 목숨과 흘러내린 잔머리 서로 같이 어디 가던 내 핸드백은 네 허리 You're my honey 볼 때마다 숨이 막혀 명동거리처럼 우리의 BGM은 숨소리 내 이름을 불러줄 때의 네 목소리에 잠겨서 난 수영하고파 너를 좀 더 알고파 너란 미지에서 불깊이 몸하는 탐험가 너란 작품에 대해 감상을 해 너란 존재가 예술이니까 이렇게 매일 난 밤새도록 상상을 해 어차피 내게는